No, there's no pictures. I'm very sorry we're late. Technicalities. Can everybody hear me? Chaim, can you hear me? Yeah, you can.
Yes.
It's fine. Why is this screwing this? Okay, fine. It's fine. What if holding it would be better? Okay. We're up to Daf Tzadik Tes Amud Aleph, top line. I'd just like to point out that tomorrow the Shiur will be at 11 o'clock, not 10 o'clock. And it will be on Zoom, on the normal Sunday to Thursday numbers, code. And it will then be uploaded, hopefully, by Moshe Sinitsky before Shabbos. No, hopefully as soon as possible. And on Sunday, we're finishing the Persian, Mr. Hashem. On tomorrow, I'd like to finish to Daf Tzadik Kuf Beis Amud Aleph. If anybody can get to the Mishnah Kuf Beis Amud Aleph, that's where we'll be getting to Mr. Hashem in the Mishnah and the Shiur tomorrow. Kuf Beis Amud Aleph. Says the Gemara, Tonu Rabbanim. Tonu Rabbanim, Yehuda Steinberg. The bottom curtains in the Mishkan shall tcheles without a blue wool, they shall agam on purple wool, they shall shani red wool, they shall sheish and linen. Belyonis, the top one, shall maise izim made out of goat's hair. The gdoilo chachamo shenemo belyonis yosem shenemo betachtonos. The wisdom involved in making the curtains out of goat's hair was more complicated and more than the wisdom to make the lower ones. Why? All wise women spun with their hands. The hearts were lifted up, meaning it wasn't enough to do it. They had to lift up their hearts to pull themselves up together to make even a bigger thing. Now, why would it be that the goat's hair should be more difficult than all the other one, which was required in many different colors and different kinds? Answer Gemara explains the goat's hair, the way they did it was while it was still growing on the goat, then what they did was they made sure to wash it and to spin it. There are two explanations why they would do such a thing. Why wouldn't they just cut it off, shear the hair, and then afterwards wash it and spin it?
Tuma.
Oh, Tuma, very good. Who said Tuma? Levi, who said Tuma? I didn't hear.
Yeah, it was me.
Because of Tuma. That's right, because while it's still growing, it will not become tummy. And therefore, they wanted to keep towers for as long as possible. So while it was still on the goat, they would have to wash it and spin it. The Meiri says, interestingly, that the second that hair is sheared, it loses vitality. If you want to make yourself a really nice coat, you have to go to a sheep, shear the wool, and immediately make yourself a coat. So therefore, that's why they kept it growing on the hair, they kept the hair growing on the goats in order that it should remain more beautiful. So either because of Tara, Tuma, as he said, maybe, or because of the growth is better when it's still on the goat's back. More carries on. Two balconies. The wagons in the midbar. Underneath the wagons, to the side of the wagon, and between the wagons was Shusarabim. Between each wagon was the whole length of the wagon. If you remember, the wagons were 5 amas by 2.5. Between each wagon, there was a 5 amma distance. The more will explain afterwards exactly why all this was needed. How long was it? 5 amas. If you've got 3 stacks of kroshim, and each keresh is 1.5 wide, so 3 times 1.5 is 4.5. Why would they make the wagons 5 amas long? 4.5 would do the job. Answers the Gemara, in order they shouldn't bang each other against each other. If you try and fit 3 1.5s in a 4.5 space, they would bang and squash each other. So therefore, that's why they had to have 5. So now we know why they had to have a 5 length. They're not rings. They also had rings. Yeah, it's interesting that the Gemara had having the 4.5 exactly would be good enough. But these rings are small. But the Gemara is saying you need to have 5 that they shouldn't bang into each other. The width, the sides of the wagon were the same as the width of the agola. The width of the wagon was 2.5. On each side was 1.25, which involved the walls of the wagon and the wheels of the wagon. The wheels were not underneath the wagon, but rather they were to the sides of the wagon. The camel 2.5. If you think about it, you take a big beam of wood and you balance it. How much do you need to have when you put it across? As we explained yesterday, you didn't actually put the whole beam across the wagon because the wagon was only 2.5, the beam was 10 amas long. The Gemara asks, you don't even need 2.5, 1.5 is enough. If you think about a very heavy pole, very heavy beam, and you put it, as long as there's a bit in the middle, and you balance it half on each side, it will be okay. So why do you need to have 2.5? 1.5 should be enough. Answers the Gemara, what would happen is they would jump up and down. They would move out of place. If you think about it, if you got a very long beam and you put it across a very narrow wagon, it will easily topple over because all you need is a small knock. Even if it's sitting down on the middle, it will still could knock. But the wider the base, the wider you're putting it on the wagon, the better it will settle. So they felt that 2.5 would make sure that a 10 amma beam will not seesaw up and down. Well, I didn't mean they could have strapped them down. No, they didn't strap them down. No, they're just the weight of them. The weight of them was enough. Says the Gemara, a width of which is 16 amas, and not the Gominam Mishkan, the Mishkan Chamesa have. The Mishkan was only 15. So why was it necessary to have, where does the 16? Let's work it out. Each wagon was 5 amas long, and they had 2.5 amas wide. Next to each wagon, there was 1.25 on each side where the walls and the wheels took place. So that's all together. If you have 1.25 plus 2.5 plus 1.25, means the whole width of the wagon, including the walls and the wheels, was 5 amas. And the other wagon was also 5 amas. And between the two wagons, they had 5 amas space, like we said before, that between each wagon was the half the width. Sorry? Oh, very good. You're on the ball. It actually asks the question, why not 20? Because if you put 2 sets of beams, and each beam is 10 amas, and you put it on the wagon, so you have the 2 sets of beams side by side, it's a 20 amas width. So Rashi answers because the beams were on top of the wagon, and the wagon was more than 10 tefachim above the floor, and Rishus Rabbim only goes to 10 tefachim. So the only question is from the wagons. The wagons themselves were 5, plus a space of 5, plus another 5. So people walked with the wagons. That's 15 amas. Why do you have to have 16 amas? Answers the Gemara. Amsi Asira Avoy. There was an extra amma. Ben Levi. The Levi would stand. If the kroshim would shake or fall off, you would grab them. So if you picture in your mind the procession of the Mishkan, 2 wagons, 5 amas wide, because it was 2.5 plus 1.25 of the walls and the wheels. So 5 and 5 with 5 amas in between, and 2 levim standing on either side. And normally normal width of a person is an amma, 60 centimeters. So Rashi points out that over here we're only giving half an amma to the Ben Levi. And Rashi explains that if a Ben Levi is there to make sure that none of the beams fall off, he has to quickly push himself against the wagon. That means he has to face the wagon forward, not walking abreast the wagon. He's walking next to the wagon, and every so often he pushes himself against the wagon just to grab onto the beams that they shouldn't fall off. So therefore, if you've got 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus half an amma each side is 16 amas. And here we learn that Rishus Rabbim has to be 16 amas. 16 amas is, according to the Chazon Ish, 9.6 meters. 9.6 meters. It's about 10-meter wide avenue. It is very wide. It's very wide, right? Most of it is 10 meters wide? I don't know. Okay. So that's the end of the learning of the Mishkan. We learned it out for the Mishkan. They must have a roof, has to be, okay. New Mishnah. Chulya Saboy, the bank of a pit, Ba'asela and a rock, Shein Geboy Nasa V'och V'na'abo, which are 10 by 4, 10 tefachim high by 4 by 4 wide. And if you take from them, Banus Na'al Gabon Chayav, The pochus we can smaller than that potter. This is our halacha that a Rishus HaYochid is 10 by 4. 10 by 4 could be 10 by 4 high or 10 by 4 deep. So let's say a post box. Imagine it's very likely to be 10 tefachim high. 10 tefachim is approximately, what did we say? 10 tefachim is a meter high, called Chazanish. And then you've got 4 by 4, about 40 by 40, could be. So a post box could be a Rishus HaYochid. Alternatively, if you've got a hole in the ground, which is 10 tefachim deep by 4 wide, like a pit, then that is a Rishus HaYochid. So if you've got a pit in your garden and you take something, you've got a pit in Rishus HaRabim, and you take out of the pit and you put it just on the side, or you go from Rishus HaRabim and you just put it on top of the post box, then the person is chayav because he has taken from Rishus HaYochid to Rishus HaRabim. Again, you've got Rishus HaRabim, a nice big throughway, 16 amas wide, 600,000 people walking along it. And in the middle of this Rishus HaRabim, you've got a big rock, 10 tefachim high by 4, like a post box or phone box, or anything like that, or a pillar. And all you've got a pit, 10 tefachim deep, 4, then the halacha is that if you take something from the pit and you put it in the Rishus HaRabim, alternatively from the Rishus HaRabim on top into the pit or onto the post, one has been carried from Rishus HaRabim to Rishus HaYochid, one with Uber Nissa Deraisa. I mentioned a few months ago already that somebody told me that he was walking on Shabbos. He suddenly realized he had something in his pocket, so he quickly put it on top of a post. There was a person that had a big post outside his house, and then afterwards he realized he did the worst possible thing. The post is Rishus HaYochid. If it would have dropped on the floor, it would have been better off. Oh, it's not about the ownership, it's about the size. Very good. Yes. That means even if it belongs to the public, it's considered Rishus HaYochid. That's a very good point. Tony's asking, but I'm explaining. That makes no difference. So, for example, if you've got a well which belongs to 100,000 people, and the well is 10 by 4, 10 tefachim deep, 4 by 4 wide, then you will not be able to take water out of it and go to the Rishus HaRabim and drink it. Because the Rishus HaYochid
is only natural 10 by 4.
No, if you make it 10 by 4, it's also Rishus HaYochid. It doesn't have to be natural.
No, like let's say a crevice or something, a big
Let's say
hole, which happens to be 10 by 4.
Yeah, also, even if you're man-made, makes a difference if it's man-made or natural, makes no difference. Oh, if it's less, that means there's only 9 tefachim or 8 tefachim high, or 3 tefachim, then it's not. But if it's more, then it is a Rishus HaYochid, yes. It's a very good point, I should have said this as well. Moshe pointed out that when we say if it's different, then it's not a Rishus HaYochid. What we mean is if it's less than 10 tefachim high, or if it's less than 4 by 4, then it's not a Rishus HaYochid, it's a Bokim Petur. But if it's more than that, then it's definitely Rishus HaYochid. If you've got, let's say in Rishus HaRabim, suddenly you've got like a nice big area, which is like a big platform, right? You make a platform in the middle of Rishus HaRabim, that's definitely Rishus HaYochid. Says the Gemara, why talk about a bank of a pit? And a rock. Talk about a pit and a rock. Why talk about the bank of a pit? There's a very big chiddush over here. That when we measure 10 tefachim, you can include the wall around the pit with the pit. Normally, when you dig a hole in the ground, you take the soil out, and often you use the soil to make a rim or a wall around the pit. So let's say you dig 5 tefachim deep, and you make a wall 5 tefachim wide, then you have a wall which is 10 tefachim, and that's considered enough to be a proper wall, and that is a Rishus HaYochid, and therefore one is chayav. So if you've got 5 deep plus a wall of 5, one is chayav because that's considered Rishus HaYochid. There was a left shlita once told me like this, that he has been involved in many Eruvim. And Eruv, the main problem is making a wall around the entire area. So he quoted this Gemara, and he said like this, that most canals and rivers, they have a wall around them, a wall between, they don't want people to fall in, and the water does not reach means you've got like, let's say the bank of the river is 5 tefachim, plus the wall is 5 tefachim, therefore you've got automatically a 10 tefachim high wall. I was once walking along Hebden Bridge, and if you go there, there's actually quite a nice canal. And I saw that, mamish that idea, so he said many Eruvin, I don't know if the man today realized it, but if you've got a nice canal, Venice would be a very good place to make an Eruv. Because every bank you can include both the depths and the height of the wall around it to make 10 tefachim. So even if the wall around, if you go to Water Park Lake, for example, so there's a gate, right? The gate around the lake. Even if the gate's not 10 tefachim, you have to measure also the wall going inwards below the gate. Because that means if you dig a hole 5 tefachim and you make a wall 5 tefachim, you got 10 tefachim. So that's considered a shusayachim. Now the Gemara just brings proofs to this. 10 by 4. You can't fill water from it on Shabbos. Top of Tzadik Testament base. And then we can also unless you make a wall around it. So if you've got a well, the only way to drink water from a well is to make walls around the well. You can't drink. Here's interesting. This is the Gzer Rabbanon. Let's say I've got a pit, a well, and I want to drink. So I put my head into the well and I drink. The problem is we're scared that while you're drinking, you'll take your body out of the well. You'll back out. Right? People don't drink when they're in a well. And you may come to take water out of the shusayachet into shusarabim. So what can you do? If your head and most of your body is in the vicinity, in the walls of the pit, you're okay. But if it's just your head inside, that's no good. Why is that no good? Because when you're taking water, you often drink back. Let's get this clear again. If you go to a well and you want to drink from it, right? So you want to scoop some water. So you take your hand, scoop some water from the shusayachet. You lift it up, it's still inside the walls of the well, you're okay. You take it out of the walls where you're standing, the shusarabim, you're now done. So that's awesome. If you put your head and most of your body, as you lean over the wall of the well, and you put most of your body into the wall of the well, and then you drink, we're not worried about that. Like we explained, a hole with a wall around it, with a bank around it, combined together to make 10 tefach. Here we have now quite a number of shilas in the Gemara, interesting shilas, all to do with the shusarabim and shusayachit. Some of them will copy them. You've got a pillar which is exactly 10 by 4. Let's imagine a pillar or post box. You threw and it landed on top of it. You took it up from the shusarabim, which was forbidden, and you put it down in the shusayachit, which is a hissa. So therefore, you're chayav. The reality is that above 10 tefachim the shusarabim is what? Does anybody remember? Above 10 tefachim the shusarabim, what is it? It's mokim b'tur. Now, if you pick it up in the shusarabim, you pick it up, and you want to put on top of a pillar 10 by 4, the only way to put it on top is how? Is you first have to lift it higher than 10 tefachim, and then you put it down on the pillar. If you don't lift your hand higher than 10 tefachim, you will not be able to put it down on the pillar. That's the reality, scientific reality. Therefore, says the Gemara, when you pick it up with shusarabim and put it down on a rock, which is 10 by 4, so you in between the akira and the anocha, you moved it in a mokim patur. So therefore, maybe you should be potter. So he said to me, maybe not. Taste is very disturbed. In fact, it's a big question. In fact, we've had many clear sugyas that have told us that one is chayav. And Taste can't understand why Ramotcha had a shaila like this. He suggests that maybe over here, because we talk about throwing. So perhaps throwing is more kuladik. And Taste gives another very fascinating answer. If I have more time, is we talk about a much more complicated case, where you threw it upwards. And you never actually threw it sideways. You threw it up, and then it came down by itself and it landed. And therefore the question over here is that you never actually threw it in that direction. That's it. Tastes okay. I mean, the truth of the matter is it's not Posh Pshat, it's not how Rashi explains it. So it goes like this. It's our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says if you put something on a stone 10 by 4, you're chayav. So what's your shayla? It's a Mishnah. So when he asked Rava told him it's a Mishnah. Also shayla to Rabbi Yosef. So he went and asked Rabbi Yosef. He said it's our Mishnah. Also shayla to Abaya. Went to ask Abaya. He asked 3 separate people. He got 3 exact answers. He said to them, all of you, do you all spit with the same spit? Spit, it does not have a pleasant taste. And the fact is, you're all giving me the same identical answer, which I don't like. So you're all actually spitting with the same style kind of answer. What do you want? we like our answer, but the Mishnah says a chayav. What better can you have than a Mishnah? You don't like the fact that we're giving you the same answer, but our answer is very good, so you can't complain. So he said, no. Our Mishnah talk about a needle. A needle is very, very flat. You don't need to lift it higher than 10 tefachim. You can actually keep it at the height of 10 tefachim and place it on top of the pillar, which is 10 by 4. Says, even a needle, if you're being very scientific about it, and the pillar is 10 by 4, which means it's 10 tefachim high by 4 by 4 wide, it's impossible not to have to lift it slightly higher than 10 tefachim to be able to put it down on the post. The Gemara says two answers. Means like this. A pillar which is 10 by 4 is considered Rishus HaYochid. If that pillar would have on top of it a groove, alternatively, out of the pillar would come out a small shelf, right? Is a shelf. It's got a groove. Those shelves and those grooves would also be considered Rishus HaYochid. So therefore, he said from our Mishnah, you have no proof, because our Mishnah could be talking about where you took a needle and you slid it in a groove on the top of 10 by 4, where you never actually lifted it higher than 10 by 4. Alternatively, our Mishnah is talking about where you've got 10 by 4 with a little shelf coming out and you put it on that shelf without ever going higher than 10 by 4. Therefore, you've got no right. But the mice, we pass them, if you pick something up, even if you then put it higher than 10 tefachim, when you put it down on 10 tefachim, one is chayav. So first, you should be very careful on Shabbos if you see something on the floor and you pick it up and put it on top of something. Well, let's say one of these bins, you've got these big council bins or something. You have to be very careful. Or wheeling bin. Right? The wheeling bin is a Rishus HaYochid on top of it. So there's a shalish metalta, perhaps not, one which is movable. Okay. But the fact is, you cannot pick something up and put it on top of that. Says the Gemara, new shayla. Omar Meisha, boy Rabbi Yechon, Kesef Rishus HaRabim, I'd explain it a bit outside. A person's got a wall which is not 10 by 4. It's 10 tefachim high, but not 4 by 4. It's less than 4 tefachim. The halacha is, under normal circumstances, that would not be a Rishus HaYochid, because it's not 10 by 4, it's not 10 by 4. Whenever we say 10 by 4, we mean 10 by 4 by 4. 10 tefachim high, 4 by tefachim wide, 4 tefachim thick. It has to be a big proper post in order to be a Rishus HaYochid. If it's only 10 tefachim high, 4 tefachim wide, and let's say only 1 tefach thick, so it's like a fence, that's nothing. That's not Rishus HaYochid. The top of this fence is a Rishus HaYochid because it's in a garden, but if it would be in a Rishus HaRabim, that would not be a garden. That would not be a Rishus HaYochid, right? So again, if you've got a wall which is 10, but not 10 by 4 by 4, it's just 10. But the wall is surrounding a Carmelis, and because it surrounds the Carmelis, a Carmelis is an area which is like an empty area. We talked about it once, something like that, say an empty ground. Because it surrounds the Carmelis like a field, it now made the field into a Rishus HaYochid, into a private domain. Do we say the wall is not a Rishus HaYochid, the area within the wall is a Rishus HaYochid? Or do we say, no, now that the wall created a Rishus HaYochid, now that the wall surrounds an area and makes it into a Rishus HaYochid, therefore the wall itself also becomes a Rishus HaYochid. That is the shayla of the Gemara. Again, a wall with it which is adjacent to Rishus HaRabim. Geboya saw 10 tefachim high, but not 4 tefachim wide. Or mukaf lekarmelis, and it's surrounding a karmelis. But also Rishus HaYochid, but by surrounding it with this wall, you made it into Rishus HaYochid. What's the din if you throw on top of it? It's not 4 tefachim wide, it's just a 10 tefachim high. So it's a mokim petur, so I've not done anything. Since you made the area within of Rishus HaYochid, you made the whole area Rishus HaYochid, and therefore the whole thing is Rishus HaYochid. Amar says, that's what they call shekain. If for everything else within the Carmelis, within the walls, is considered the Rishus HaYochid, the wall itself is Rishus HaYochid. So let's say this, you can't really see it so well, but let's say you've got a flimsy-ish fence, 10 tefachim high, only 1 tefachim wide, not the best kind of fence. And it's surrounding a Carmelis, it's surrounding, let's say, a football field. The football field would be a good example of a Carmelis. Or a field where you put your sheep inside, and you surround it properly, now it becomes Rishus HaYochid. So, and now you put something on top of the wall, that wall is a Rishus HaYochid. And that's why somebody once told me, oh, you heard the Stearns I can see on Zoom. It was your uncle, B'Shem your uncle, that when he sees people picking up their children and put them down on these little walls. My children love it, to walk along these walls. It's very thrilling to walk along a wall, right? So there's certain walls that children can't go past unless they've walked on top of the wall. It's part of their obligation of walking in that area. So if you pick them up on Shabbos and put them down on the wall in an area where there's no Eruv, then you've carried from Rosh Hashanah. Well, nowadays we don't really have a Rosh Hashanah. If you had a Rosh Hashanah, you carry from a place Rosh Hashanah, but then put it in Rosh Hashanah, it's also. Even if the wall is not 10 by 4 by 4, even if the wall is only 10 by 1, because since the wall surrounds Rosh Hashanah, picking something up is not awesome in that it's only awesome in the Rabbanon. Because a Chayin knows it's Atzmo. We can't say it's mutter. Okay, you're right. We're not talking about the worst of their possible, but a person has to be aware of the problem. Yes, it has to. No, it has to be.
Got one little stretch, but not.
That won't be anything. Yes, yeah. Okay, so the Gemara says like this, that it is chad. It's v'nami. Next to Shusam, right? Within Shusam, but also you should say, you surround the Karmelis, why? So we've settled now two questions. Question number one was throwing on top of something which is 10 tefachim high, where in the process you go higher than 10 tefachim, where the Gemara says that you're chayav. And another question we had is a wall which is less than 10 by 4 by 4. It's only 10 by 1, let's say. But it's surrounding a calmness and it makes the calmness into Shusay Yochid, then that is considered the Shusay Yochid as well. The wall is considered the Shusay Yochid and it's forbidden. A new shayla will say it outside. We just spoke about a pit which is 10 tefachim deep is a Shusay Yochid. If it's only 9 tefachim deep, what is it? Because people don't use it, it's not considered a separate reshus. What happens if it was 9 tefachim deep, and at the bottom of the pit there was one big stone? If you take the stone out, it's going to be 10 tefachim deep, and this person takes the stone out of the pit. Now, once he's taken the stone out of the pit, it's 10 tefachim deep, so of course carrying it is forbidden, or carrying from it is forbidden. But this person carried the actual stone from the pit. So in the same action, he created it of a Shusay Yochid and he carried from a Shusay Yochid. So by taking the stone out, he then took it out of the pit, and now the pit is now 10 tefachim deep, and at the same time he's carrying from Shusay Yochid. Or do you say, wait a second, when he took the stone, the pit was only 9 tefachim deep? Is the picture clear? If the picture is not clear, you should always stop me straight away. You've got a pit 9 tefachim deep. The bottom of the pit has got one big slab. You pick the slab up. By taking that slab off, you've now created the pit which is 10 tefachim. Do we say, well, when I took it off, there was no 10 tefachim, I'm okay. I haven't done this to the rice. Or do we say, wait a second, now that you took it out, so now it's 10 tefachim. And the same shayla is exactly the opposite way around. You've got a pit which is 10 tefachim deep. Putting something inside it is awesome in HaTorah. But what you did here, what a person did was, he took a massive slab and he put it in the pit. Do we say, you put it into 10 tefachim, so you've been a chayav? Or do we say, no, when I put it in, by the time I finish putting it down, how deep is the hole? Only 9, because I put a huge slab inside. So now it's no longer 10 tefachim deep. If it's no longer 10 tefachim deep, so if I've not done anything wrong, that is the question of the Gemara. That's the shayla of the Gemara, simple shayla. The pit which is 9 tefachim, he took out a piece. Now it's 10 tefachim. Now, the same moment you took something out, you made it to the Shusay Yochid and you're chayav. But maybe not chayav. If you say, since there wasn't a wall 10 tefachim in the beginning, if you've got 10 tefachim deep and you stick something inside it, and you made it smaller now, what do we say? The same moment you put something in, now you're chayav because you put it in 10 tefachim. You're not chayav. I mean, the Gemara asks the same shayla again. I'll repeat very briefly. You've got a whole 10 tefachim deep. You took something 9 tefachim. You took something out and made it into 10 tefachim, or you're chayav. Alternatively, it was 10 tefachim deep, and you put something in, or you're chayav. Toson Daf Ches asks a very strong question, which perhaps you should come across your mind. And that is, why does Rabbi Yochanan not say that the two questions are identical? If you look carefully in the words of Rabbi Yochanan, He doesn't say the questions are identical. He says, if in the first case you're potter, what about the second case? The second case is exactly the same as this case. I'll read out the words. If you say in the first case you're not chayav, what about the second case? The two cases are identical. The case when you take something out when it's a 9, and by taking it out it becomes 10, should be identical to the case where you put something in and make it a 9 tefachim deep. And Tosis says from here we see that akira is more important than anacha. And if Rabbi Yochanan was trying to say like this, maybe not chayav in the first case, because when you did akira there was no 9 tefachim, and therefore only later became 10 tefachim. In the second case, the akira was from Rosh Hashanah, the hanocha was done later. So Tosis says the whole difference between the first case and the second case is that the first case, the akira was problematic, in the second case, the hanocha was more problematic. And he says akira is more important than hanocha, and therefore that's why Rabbi Yochanan says maybe even in the first case it's pot, maybe in the case of chayav. It's a very serious thing.
Why is akira more? Is it because that's what the
Gilun Hashas. It doesn't say more much. He says that's what he means. Why is akira more important? Oh,
because that's what they did when they passed to Moshe. Is it because they passed to? Is it because they passed to Moshe from them?
No. It's got to do with the malacha, the tzuras malacha, the actual malacha. Picking up is a more significant act than putting down. Okay. The word shad is almost exactly the same, and I hope it's clear. When you pick something up, put something down, when you're creating 10 tefachim or destroying the 10 tefachim, because it's going to have more shads like this later, so it's good to have this clear. Is it considered a chiyuv or pot? The Gemara. Yes, in both cases, always you're going to have akira and hanocha. The question is, which party makes a person more chayav? And that's why Rabbi Yochanan understood that even if in the first case you're not chayav because the akira was problematic, maybe in the second case the akira was okay, therefore you're chayav. Yeah, you're right. Take the more tips today. Let's prove Rabbi Yochanan from something which Rabbi Yochanan himself said. It's not. The person throws something 4 amas and it lands on the wall. If it lands 110 tefachim, it's like throwing in the air and your potter. Lower than 10 So if I stand 4 amas away from a wall, throw something at a wall, and it's 4 amas away, and it's less than 10 tefachim high, I'm chayav. The Gemara says, we asked, when you hit the wall, what do most things do when you throw it against the wall? They bounce back. So why are you chayav? We're talking about a fat fig which sticks to the wall. Now, if you think about it, you're standing exactly 4 amas away. You throw this fig and it lands on the wall and it sticks. Now, the distance between you and the fig is how much? A bit less than 4 amas, because now you've got to minus the 3 centimeters that the fig itself takes up. So now how far have you thrown it? 4 amas minus 3 centimeters. So therefore, how could you say Yechayav is a raya that even though by the time the fig is stuck to the wall has now come a bit closer to you because the wall becomes thicker. Nevertheless, Yechayav. Similarly, when you put something in a pit or you take something out of the pit, you should be Chayav because we don't care about the fact that the pit has become smaller or bigger. Well, says no, you can't compare. There, when you throw the fig doesn't become part of the wall. Take the fig off and you eat it eventually. Here, eventually, you're going to leave it. And since you're going to leave it, therefore, it is going to be part of the pit. So when you put something down in a pit, which was 10 tefachim deep, and you put in a big slab of stone, you're going to leave the slab there. So now the pit is how much? Is only 9 tefachim deep. So you can't compare that to the fig, which doesn't become part of the wall, and therefore, it's still considered 4 ounces. Boy, Rabbi, another shayla, similar shayla. Let's get it clear outside first. If a person's got 4 pegs in the Rosh Hashanah, none of the pegs are 10 by 4. That area is Rosh Hashanah, it's not a Rosh Hashanah. If a person then puts down a platform on the 4 pegs, on the 4 supports, and the platform is now 10 by 4, then that platform becomes a Rosh Hashanah. Now, Rava first asks the shayla, what's the din if you throw the platform on Shabbos onto the supports? Do we say that you are carrying? So more says like this. Let's see this part first. You throw a plank of wood, but you say this and it landed on supports. Now, says more Mikey, what's the shayla? And noch als Chefetz Vasias Mechitze bei der Adadikosi, Hani du Abichnon. The same Shaila of Vav is the same Shaila as Abichnon. What's Vav's Shaila? I throw a plank of wood, it lands on 4 supports. As it lands, it creates a Vishusay Yochid. So the question is, am I chayiv? No, that's exactly what Bichnon asked. When I put something in a pit, and in the process of my carrying, I create the problem of the Shusay Yochid, or I don't create it, that's the same shayla as a Bichnon. So the Gemara says, no. Kikam really, the Rav asks a different shayla, explain it again outside. You take a plank of wood, and you put an apple on top. You throw the plank of wood onto 4 posts, with the apple balanced on top, and you throw the whole thing on top. So now, if you throw the apple by itself, you won't be chayav, because since there's only 4 posts without a platform, it's not a Rishus Yochid. If you were to put the wood there and then later throw the apple, everyone would be a chayav, because once the wood is there, you have created a Rishus Yochid, and now when you put the apple on top, you've done a carrying from Rishus Vavim to Rishus Yochid. The shayla over here, you threw them both at the same time. And the reality is, scientifically, usually when 2 things are falling, what happens? The apple will jolt a tiny bit as it lands with the wood onto the posts. And therefore, you could say that you're not chayav. Why not chayav? Because the apple and the wood landed the same moment. And until the wood landed, it wasn't Rishus Yochid. So the apple and the wood landed and became Rishus Yochid the same moment, therefore you're potter. Or do you say no? Can't say that. Why? Because the apple, when it fell onto the posts, onto the plank of wood which is on top of the post, it probably bumped a little bit and then it landed afterwards. But not bumped, I should say better. It didn't fall at the same speed. And therefore the apple landed a split second later. By the time the apple lands, there's already a whole platform step for you.
They shouldn't fall at the same speed.
Who says they don't fall at the same speed?
They should.
We'll see the more inside. What says, Ki coming bit over, going to Zorak Daf, the person threw a plank of wood, the chayfetz agavav, and there's an item on top of it. My, Kiva de Badadakos, so since they land at the same moment, Kadochas chayfetz asayas mechitza stomi. It's like creating a mechitza at the same time as doing anochas, they should be okay. It's impossible that it should float a little bit, it shouldn't go a little bit higher. It's impossible that the chayfetz shouldn't land a split second later. And only then does it land. Maybe it's like you first created the platform, and only then you carried. Teiku. So we had another shayla. We had quite a few shaylas on this staff, all about carrying. One was a pillar 10 by 4, and then you have to go higher than 10 by 4. Then we had a shayla, a wall around the camel, which makes it Shusay Yochid. Then the Gemara says you're chayav. And finally, we had 3-4 shaylas here, one after the next, which the Gemara says Teiku. One is when you take a stone and put it in a pit. One, you take a stone out of a pit. And finally, when you take something and you throw both the platform and the thing on top of the platform, and you throw them both at the same second, do we say you first created shachid and then afterwards you threw something on top? Or do we say it all landed the same moment? Take. Omarova, pshitali, what's clear for me, if you pour water onto water, that's hanocha. So if you see a well, which is 10 by 4 deep, and you take a jug of water and you pour water into the well, you'll be over Issa Deraisa from Shus Vavim to Shus Yochid. Ego is a gavimai. If you throw a nut onto Porter Bark Lake, top of Kuf Amudalef, oh, got staff for Kuf. 100 daf, well actually 99, we started daf base. It says, well, if you throw a nut onto Porter Park Lake, you haven't done hanocha. Why have you not done hanocha? Because water is not stable. And therefore, what happens is you haven't put it down properly. Yes, we had exactly the same sugya word for word in the first spell. What happens if you take a nut, put it in a bowl, and you throw the entire thing on the water? You say, look, the nut is in a bowl. The bowl is considered a proper resting place. Maybe we look at the bowl, and the bowl itself is not resting because the bowl is on water. Teiku. That means water on water, that's called hanocha. A nut on water, that's not called hanocha. A nut in a bowl on water, that's a shayla in the Gemara on Teiku. Do we say that's considered hanocha or not hanocha? And the Gemara carries on exactly word for word like we had in the previous book. That is like this. Oil always floats on other liquids. If you put oil on wine, The halacha was like this: Shem nagabi yain. What happens if you pour oil onto wine? It's none. The halacha is a tvul yom. I mean, somebody who went to mikveh and still needs to wait for nacht. The halacha is it makes truma possible, which means that the truma is no good, but the truma does not make anything else tummy. Whenever you've got truma, you've always got two expressions, two terminologies. One is tummy, one is possible. Tummy, this you should write it down on your kitchen walls. Tummy is when something becomes so tummy that if it touches something else, that thing will also become tummy. Possible is when it becomes tummy, but it can't transfer tumah. So the halacha is that Tvul Yom has the power to make tumah possible, but not to make tumah tummy. So imagine that Tvul Yom comes home. And he's a kohen. He went to mikveh, but he never waited for nacht. That's at this time of day. It's not yet shkir. Is it yet shkir? No, it's not yet shkir. So he comes home. He's toibled already. And his wife has got their big bowl with wine at the bottom and the oil on the top. And he touches the oil. So the oil, you can be sure that the oil is tummy. It's possible. The question is, do we say he's also touched the wine? Just like if you touch the top layer of the oil, all the oil becomes tummy, even though you only touch the top, because he's touched the body of oil. And since we say this is a whole big bucket of liquid, therefore, it's as if he touched all the liquid in the bucket and it's all tummy. Or do we say, no, the oil is separate from the wine. So he's touched the oil. The oil is possible, but the wine underneath is not. So what says like this? It's now shemen shetzop agabi yayin, oil that floats on top of wine, but no gat volume b'shemen, and its volume touches the oil. Loy posel el shemen. He's only passed the oil, but the wine is still toy. It's both connected, and therefore, since they're both connected, the halacha is it is all tummy. And that same shaila will have ramifications regarding Shabbos. If a person pours oil onto wine, is it considered a hanocha or not? Omar Abaya, we'll explain this a bit outside. We just talked about earlier another shaila we had where you put a stone in a pit or take out of a pit, whether it's considered carrying, since by putting the stone in or taking the stone out, you're creating a new domain. What happens if you've got a pit? It's exactly 8 by 4 by 10. So now, that is a Rishus HaYochid, because as we said, more than that is also Rishus HaYochid. And what you go and do is, you throw something in it, of course you chayav. What happens if you take a mat, and you put the mat directly in between, in the middle? Now, a mat has to have some sort of thickness. Let's say it's 2 centimeters thick. Now you've created 2 areas, neither of which are 4 by 4. One area is just underneath 4 by 4. Another is just underneath 4. Again, you've got an area which is 8 tefachim long and 4 wide. And it's 10 tefachim deep. So that's what Rishus HaYochid. You throw something in, of course, you chayav. What happens if you put something in, but in the process of putting it in, you put in a big mat, and that mat splits the area into 2, and now you have 2 areas, which in neither area is 4 by 4. What's the halacha? Now, the halacha should depend on which shaila. On the exact same shaila we had before, when you put something in a pit, and automatically by putting it in the pit is no longer Rishus HaYochid. Like you put a stone in something which is 10 by 4, and by putting the stone in, it's now only 9 by 4. The Gemara says there's a small difference. I thought that the Gemara says, oh, the Gemara says Jules, I didn't think of that. The Gemara says a mat, it doesn't last as long. When you put a stone in a pit, you want to keep it there. Slab, that's part of the pit. When you put a mat there, you don't really keep it there forever. Not like a fig exactly, because by a fig the Gemara has no shaila. It's closer to a fig than a stone. So the Gemara says, Omar Abai, a pit which is 10 by 8, you throw a mat in it without splitting it. Just throw a mat in. Chayav, and as the Miri says, there's no chiddush to this. He only meant the next thing. What is the chiddush? If you divide it, potter. You're potter. Why are you potter? Because since you put the mat directly in the middle, you've now created 2 areas, which in neither of them are 10 by 4, and therefore you're not carrying to Rishus HaYochid, you're carrying to Mokim Tum. If according to Abai, that a mat can get rid of a rishus, a slab of stone. Rabbi Yehuda said it's obvious. He will say to you by a mat, since you don't keep the mat there, so it's not mevatel mechitza. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, you would be chayav, because when you put the mat in between the 2 areas, you're still chayav. Why are you chayav? Because you're not mevatel it. Since you're not mevatel it, so the pit is still 10 by 8. 10 by 8 is Rosh Hashanah, so therefore you're chayav. Omar Abayim. And you've got a pit 10 by 4, that's Rosh Hashanah. And now you fill it up with water. Why? Water does not get rid of it. Water does not diminish the size. If you've got a pit 10 by 4, like a pond in Porton Park Lake, Eaton Park Lake, or if you've got a well in your garden, a fish pond, 10 by 4, and it's filled with water, you're chayav. What?
You haven't done a proper anocha.
Oh, we're talking about where it's not floating. It's a good question, Shaya. Oh, you didn't do a proper anocha. We're talking about something that doesn't float, something that sinks to the bottom. Very good. Meleo peiros, if it's full of food, water does not get rid of it, because water, since things don't always float, things sink inside it, so water does not get rid of the rishus, the domain. But fruit does. So if you've got a big pit and you fill it up with apples, and now anything you put inside it will stay on top, it's not considered putting it down the Shusay because it's full. And therefore, it's no longer considered the Shusay Yochid. And that's it. Okay, it's a svordic thing. It also says, a person that throws from a sea to a street square, we'll see later that the sea is considered a Carmelis. That means like this. If you've got a place in the sea where there's a wall around one area, that means in the sea or in a pool, you make a 10 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide sealed area, that area will be considered Rosh Hashanah. Sometimes they have in the sea, they want to have places for people to swim and they make barriers within the sea. If you make a 10 by 4 barrier within the sea, that area will be Rosh Hashanah. Oh, it's full of water. The answer is that water is not Mavata Machit. So the next is very easy because we've already had it so many times. I want to count a bit more. Azurk Abamas, because if you throw 4 amas against the wall, if it lands hard and 10 tefachim, Gezurk Ba'av is like throwing in the air and your potter. Lamata Masot Tefachim, Gezurk Ba'oret is like throwing in the ground, and Azurk Ba'oret Abamas Chayav. So if you take something sticky, like we'll see later, and you throw it against, let's say you're standing on the M62, and next to the M62 there's a big wall, and as we said, the wall could be Rosh Hashanah, and you throw something. If it lands higher than 10 tefachim and it stays there, you're potter. Why? Because it's higher than 10 tefachim, it's like throwing in the air. If it lands there and it sticks to the wall and it's lower than 10 tefachim, one is chayav. Says the Gemara, but it never stops there, it bounces back. We're talking about a fatty fig, which is something which sticks to the wall. It sticks to it, since it sticks to it, therefore, what is chayav? Person throws higher than 10. And it lands in the hole. We had this machlekes a few times. We're going to have it many times again. The machlekes is called choykikim. The main machlekes is regarding hilchas mezuzah. In hilchas mezuzah, we have a principle. And in order for a doorway to need a mezuzah, it has to have 10 by 4. What happens if you've got a wall, which is an archway, and it's 10 tefachim high, but the top of the archway is not 4 tefachim wide. It's only 1 tefach wide. What do you say?
There's Rachlux with Meir, I think.
Oh, that's what he's saying. So you've got 10 tefachim high, and it's less than 4 tefachim wide at the top. But the wall is big enough, the entrance where you could chisel out and make it a 10 by 4. That's a machlekes of Meir Nechamim. Do we say choykin nahashlim? Something which has the potential to be chiseled out, do we consider it as if it's already chiseled out, and therefore it's a chayav in the mezuzah? Similarly, if you've got a very big wall, and you throw something in it into a little crevice, and the crevice is tiny, so it's not 10 by 4, it's 10 tefachim high, but there's no 4 by 4 there, it's a little hole. According to a Meir that we say that by anything which has the potential to be chiseled out is as if it's already been chiseled out, then you're chayav. According to the Chachamim, your potter. More says like this. We don't consider as if you chiseled out to complete lo mechayev. If you land in a little hole which is tiny, but it's high 10, but it's not 4 by 4 because the hole is very small. A mound which goes up 4 amas. So 10 tefachim within 4 amas. This is a very, very important halacha. If you got a slope and the slope goes up 10 tefachim within the distance of 4 amas, then that is considered a proper wall and it's a reshus hayochid. So therefore, if you've got a wall, if you've got, let's say, coming out of a bank, right, you see, and it's 10 tefachim high, 4 tefachim within 4 amas, that's a proper wall. Tani nami Movui. A movui has to have a wall around it in order to be able to carry within the wall. Let's say you have a movui which is higher than the reshus harabim or lower than the reshus harabim. But between the movui and the reshus harabim, there's a slope. So the halacha is like this: movui sheshovel esoichoi. Its height is normal. The nas and between the reshus harabim, but it's a slope to go up. Sorry, to go down into the reshus harabim. Or sheshovel reshus harabim nas and between the esoichoi. Or you have to go a slope down into the mob because the mob is lower than reshus harabim. Or you say mob in its it does not need a beam or a string around. Why not? Because it's considered a wall. So therefore, if you got a wall which is a slope on its chad, there are many halachas to this. I just say very briefly because this is halacha as well regarding eruvin. I almost spent a long time discussing eruvin. That many areas rely on this for an eruv. If you go to any riverbank or to any beach front, there's almost always a mound which is 10 tefachim high within a distance of 4 amas. 4 amas is about 10 meters. 10 tefachim is about 4 amas is about 2.4 meters. 10 tefachim is about 100 centimeters. A mound which goes sloping upwards is 10 tefachim. That's considered the reshus hayochid. And it says if you've got a proper wall, and if you need an eruv, you can use a slope as a net wall. It's a very important halacha. There's a very big shine in the poskim as to whether steps are considered a wall as well. The shine is as follows: the reason why a slope is considered a wall is because you cannot stand comfortably on the slope, and therefore it's considered a place which nobody can be. It's like it's a mechitza. It's a place to stop people getting through. Steps are quite comfortable. Since they're comfortable, you can actually stay on each step for a long time without having to move. What? So that's what we said. The gradient is 10 tefachim within 4 amas. If, let's say, it takes 5 amas to go up 10 tefachim, then it's not a wall. It has to be a gradient of, it's a good word, gradient. I should have used it before. If it's the gradient for it to be a wall has to be that within 4 amas, it goes up 10 tefachim. Let's say it takes 5 amas to go up 10 tefachim. Or within 4 amas, it only goes up 8 tefachim. That's not a proper gradient to be considered a wall. But if it goes up 10 tefachim with 4 amas, that's enough. And the shayla is by steps which go up like that. It's a big shayla in the poskim whether that's also considered a wall. So therefore, for example, this garden over here, I don't know, I can't tell exactly. It could very well be that the whole garden is considered a wall. And therefore, if let's say this garden would surround, you've got to the Heaton Park in certain areas. You've got nice gradients. Therefore, let's say you've got a patch of grass. What? Oh, that's another thing. He said by many times when you're coming out of a train tracks, you've also got a 10 tefachim mechitza. So if you've got a train track around the town, that can also be used as a wall because every train track will always have a barrier of 10 tefachim high. So Lev said, it's very hard to make a wall around the town to create an eruv. So we've got today 3 different ones: either a gradient or any canal, or any train tracks. That's already an automatic wall for you. So if you've got train tracks across the eastern side of Manchester, so now you've got a wall across the whole eastern Manchester.
How are train tracks a wall?
What? See?
How do train tracks work out to be a wall?
Because by the side of a train tracks, 99% of the time there's a wall. You ever seen by the metro link? Not always, actually. Not always. Sometimes you have trains. So, an embankment. Getting better English. Embankment. The embankment is usually, but any gradient which is 10 tefachim by 4 amas, that is considered a proper wall for Hilchas Shabbos and eruvin and for reshus hayochid, and therefore a person can use it to make it a reshus hayochid or to make an eruv. Okay, very good. Tomorrow the Shiur will be 11 o'clock. from this Mishnah to the Mishnah on Daf Kuf Beis Amud Aleph. Mitzvah Hashem.
Let's go.
Yes.
Water, isn't it Pshita, the question?
2.5. Yes, 3 actually. What did you say?
Isn't it Pshita for water? We had a question about when water, if someone throws it and it gets into a pit, the water doesn't diminish the size. Isn't it Pshita? Because in the end of the day, it'll sink through the water and reach the bottom. So you've still done a 10 tefachim drop, at least.
What?
All the waters, the object that you throw
is
only going to be, is still going to drop 10 tefachim. All the water is doing is slowing it down.
No, nothing floats.
But then there's no question because you haven't done a nacha.
Yes.
So
No, that's what it says.
Sank. We must be talking about when it sank to the bottom.
Yeah, right.
If it sank to the bottom, then it sunk 10 tefachim.
No. The Chiddush is, you might have thought that floating is also considered Adocha. That floating is not considered Adocha. That's the Chiddush. The Chiddush is that floating itself, you might have thought to the proper Adocha. It's like putting on the wall. Yeah? Okay, have a very good try. It's not.